first mistake was so small that most people laughed. A news anchor paused mid-sentence, frowned, and repeated a word that suddenly sounded wrong in her mouth. She smiled, corrected herself, and moved on. Viewers joked online about tongue slips and long workdays. No one worried. Language had always bent without breaking. But the next morning, the headlines didn't quite make sense. The words were all there, spelled correctly, arranged properly, and yet something was off. Sentences felt hollow, like containers missing their contents. You could read them, but understanding lagged behind, arriving late or not at all. People reread paragraphs 3 or 4 times, blaming fatigue, distraction, screens. By afternoon, conversations slowed. People stopped finishing each other's sentences. Jokes landed without impact, punchlines arriving as sounds without meaning. Arguments fizzled out not because anyone agreed, but because the words failed to carry intention. Apologies felt thin. Promises felt empty. It was like speaking through glass. Linguists noticed first. They ran tests and found nothing broken. Grammar held. Vocabulary remained intact. Syntax obeyed every rule it always had. And yet comprehension rates dropped globally by fractions of a percent each day. A slow decay, evenly distributed, impossible to localize. Language was not collapsing, it was fading. Within weeks, translation software became useless. Machines could convert words perfectly, but meaning slipped through the cracks. A sentence translated into another language arrived even weaker than before, like a copy of a copy. International meetings dissolved into careful silence. Treaties stalled not over disagreements, but because no one could be certain what had been agreed upon. Education fractured. Teachers spoke, students listened, but retention vanished. Words entered ears and exited unchanged, never settling. Children raised their hands less. Reading assignments shrank. Schools began teaching through demonstration instead of explanation, gestures replacing paragraphs. Then came the fear. Emergency instructions lost clarity. Medical consent forms confused even doctors. A warning shouted in the street arrived as noise stripped of urgency. Accidents increased not from recklessness, but from misunderstanding. The world had been built on shared symbols, and those symbols were dissolving. People tried to adapt. They spoke more slowly, they simplified. They repeated themselves endlessly, hoping meaning would stick through sheer persistence. But repetition only accelerated the decay. The more a word was used, the less weight it carried. Common phrases vanished first. I love you became a sound people recognized but no longer felt. Help lost its edge. Silence grew valuable. Gestures became deliberate. Eye contact mattered more than speech ever had. Touch returned to communication in ways society had long avoided. A hand on a shoulder said more than a sentence could. A shared look could carry agreement, fear, comfort, all without risking distortion. Art changed. Books stopped being written. Music surged not for lyrics, but for tone and rhythm. Paintings grew simpler, bolder, trying to carry meaning without explanation. Theater abandoned dialogue entirely. Actors moved through stories the way dancers always had, trusting the body where words had failed. Governments struggled to maintain authority. Laws relied on language. Orders depended on clarity. When citizens could no longer be sure what was meant, enforcement softened. Power shifted from institutions to proximity. Communities grew smaller, tighter, bound by familiarity rather than instruction. And still, language kept thinning. Eventually, even names began to feel unstable. People recognized each other's faces, their histories, their emotional weight, but names slid away like soap. You knew who someone was, but not what to call them. Identity became experiential instead of symbolic. Scientists searched desperately for a cause. There was none they could reach. Language, it seemed, was not guaranteed. It was an emergent phenomenon, a fragile agreement billions of minds had maintained without ever realizing how much effort it took. And that agreement was unraveling. Years passed, the world did not end. It became quieter, slower, more careful. Misunderstandings still happened, but fewer words meant fewer distortions. Violence decreased in some places, increased in others. Without propaganda, lies struggled to spread, but so did warnings. Children born during the fading learned differently. They communicated through expression, movement, shared activity. Their minds adapted, building meaning without reliance on sound or text. They looked at the old recordings of speeches and books the way people once looked at hieroglyphs, with curiosity and distance. One evening, an old man sat with his granddaughter, watching the sky darken. He tried to tell her about the time when stories were spoken aloud, when words could build worlds inside the mind. He opened his mouth, searching for sounds that still worked. She watched him patiently, then leaned her head against his arm. He understood then. Language had not failed humanity. Humanity had simply reached a moment where words were no longer the strongest way to carry meaning. And in the long quiet that followed, the world learned to listen again, not to sentences, but to presence, intention, and the unspoken understanding that had always existed beneath the noise of language, waiting for the moment it was needed most.